Hey everyone, Geophysicist Stefan Burns here. Breaking news, we just had a magnitude 4.2 earthquake strike directly on the San Andreas Fault here in California at Frazier Park. And this is highly significant because this is exactly where the Garlock Fault meets in with the San Andreas. And at least for the past 26 years, the 21st century, we have not seen an earthquake hit this exact location at this magnitude. So this is a very significant earthquake as it relates to understanding the evolving stress and strain dynamics of the San Andreas, of the Garlock Fault, of the overall tectonic environment for California. So this occurred today, July 12th, 2026, at a depth of about 13 kilometers. We can look at our USGS latest earthquakes map right here, and we see this earthquake there. And you see the mountain ranges. They actually really show you the faults pretty directly. So we see this line cutting across there. We see that there's a bend in the San Andreas right here. This is highly significant because where you get bends in major faults, that's where the strain really accumulates. And so that bend is well overdue for a big earthquake. So 4.2 right there, and we can even look specifically at the Did You Feel It map. Here we see all these California faults very clearly. And so the epicenter, again, as you can see, directly on the Garlock Fault. Both of these faults, the San Andreas and the Garlock Fault, are strike slip faults, meaning the plates glide past each other like this, okay? And well, in fact, the Garlock Fault is heavily locked up. It hasn't had a major rupture. Think magnitude 7.5 for 500 to 1,000 years. So we can look back at the paleoseismic record, and we do see these past very large rupture events on it. Think like 2-3 meters of displacement, perhaps. Like big movements in the fault, but we haven't had a big rupture in the Garlock Fault in the historic time period. So it is capable of magnitude 7.5 and greater earthquakes. And we know that the stress and the overall strain accumulated on the Garlock Fault is very high, as it is also with the San Andreas. So if you get a earthquake right there hitting precisely the point where the two meet, and we haven't seen an earthquake of that magnitude strike that area in at least 26 years, you know that something's evolving here. Here's our Did You Feel It? So in general, light, weak shaking that were felt by people, nothing really too crazy. Here we see our historic seismicity, and you'll notice that we get earthquakes to the south of this Y junction, and we get them also to the north. So there's this stress displacement that occurs, and then you start to get some rumbles down there. We do see a big earthquake right there. I believe that's the 1952 earthquake. We can give it a look if we go to my Google Earth map here. Here we see the epicenter on Google Earth. And let's turn on our magnitude 7 earthquakes. And yes, that is the magnitude 7.5 there that occurred on the 21st of July, 1952 at a depth of 6 kilometers. So that one is certainly connected in to the Garlock and the San Andreas just simply due to its proximity, but it did not occur exactly on it. But that was one of the biggest earthquakes that's struck in a long time. Here we see 1812, the 8th of December. That was a big one because there was also a double sequence. So it was a 7.5, 7.1. And then if you go north up to this region, near Paso Robles, you have the magnitude 7.9, 1857 Fort Tejon earthquake. So these are some of the big earthquakes that have struck this region over the past 200 plus years. You can also even go down here to San Diego, magnitude 7.4, 1800 right there. And really since then, since this 1952 earthquake, most of the activity has been going off here into the Mojave, into the East California shear zone and the seismic zone there. So a really clear example of that is the magnitude 7.1 that struck Ridgecrest here. This is 2019. There was a magnitude 6.4 foreshock that occurred the day before, and this increased stress on the Garlock Fault by about 30%. That is what the USGS and seismologist calculations are showing. So we already know that the Garlock is locked and loaded for a big rupture, could be magnitude 7 or higher, magnitude 7.5 or greater even. And then we get this magnitude 7.1 earthquake here, the strongest to strike California in 20 plus years, to then increase the strain on the Garlock Fault by more than 30%. So this development here with this magnitude 4.2, though it's not a big earthquake, it's definitely telling as it relates to the changing dynamic of tectonic stress in California. Here we see the past 26 years for this specific section of the San Andreas and where the Garlock Fault meets. And so we see these earthquakes here to the south. We see them up here to the north. I have this sorted by largest magnitude. So you see two magnitude 5s in there, 5.2 there and a 5.1 there, top and bottom. Pretty interesting to note. 2024, 2023. So we see this natural evolution progression there. If you go down a little bit, we will eventually find this 4.2 that just struck Frazier Park. So it is one of the strongest earthquakes to strike this region in the past 26 years. But you'll also notice, again, while there are some other earthquakes that have hit the San Andreas and the Garlock Fault, this one is basically the only one exactly on it. We can also count these magnitude 3s here, 3.1, 3.2, 3.5, but a 4.2 is significantly larger than that. So that's important to note. Now, if you go back here, let's zoom out and let us look at some recent earthquake activity that we've had, because this is all part of a progression that's unfolding right now at this moment in time. And this really begins with this magnitude 5.7 that struck Silver Springs, Nevada, just outside of Reno. And this is important because this is part of the Nevada seismic zone, the shear zone here, Walker Lane, where you have a lot of the plate movement actually between the Pacific North American plates grinding past each other and accommodating that movement through Walker Lane. You can basically trace it by drawing right in between these lakes like that, which is significant. So this occurs in an area that helps California to, let's say, unlock and move. That occurred on the 14th of April. And then we have this historic earthquake here that struck in between Ukiah and Willits, 5.6 on the 24th of June. Why historic? Well, we haven't had a big earthquake of that magnitude there in that region as far as we know. I'm sure they've happened in the past, hundreds of years ago, but this, for the historic record going back more than 100 plus years, we've never seen it before. So that is very significant because this is also a key area, as you notice, right where the San Andreas undergoes this bend. And you can look at the historic record and there's a line of earthquakes that cut across here. I can show you that if we turn on our 4s and our 5s. So here we go. Here are 4s and our 5s. And we see this line of earthquakes that cuts across, separating this mountainous block from this mountainous block right there, okay? So that 5.6 being highly significant as it relates to the overall changing dynamic for California, because now it's showing new movement in areas that typically have 0, and that these blocks up here are shifting and moving. You may remember that we had a magnitude 7 that struck just off the triple point there, December 5th of 2024. I believe that's on my map here. Let me pull it up. There it is. And we get other magnitude 7s that strike this area every now and then. So that did occur up there. And in fact, we can look at this by going to this map here. Here we have our recent earthquakes. And we see this magnitude 7 up there. We see that the next strongest earthquake, I was just going to point this out, is this one here to the northwest of Cuba, which is widely felt across Florida. And I pay attention to earthquakes that are a little bit further away from California because we know that the seismic waves can load stress onto distant faults. That's, again, talking to that 2019 ridge crest, then loading stress onto the Garlock Fault afterwards. That's a very well-established phenomena. We also see this sequencing across time, 1812 being a great example because we had earthquake activity on New Madrid, December of 1811, going through the end of spring 1812. Right in the middle of that, in March, we had the double sequence hit Caracas, 1812. That was magnitude 7.4, 7.1. And that's the biggest seismic disaster that they've had until this year, right? on the same day that we had the 5.6 in Willits, they had their doublet, their 7.5, their 7.2, highly destructive. There's still like 30,000 plus people missing from that, 4,000 plus confirmed dead. So we did just have this new doublet there on the Bonoco fault in Venezuela. And well, we see the 6.1 there for Cuba in the Gulf, basically spreading this energy up. We've never seen an earthquake that big in the historic record. We did also just have this magnitude 6 down here in Baja. There is a connection between earthquakes in Baja and further up in California. So not every time, but we do have some examples of that. So everything's effectively lined up and ready to go. And well, now we have this 4.2 right at the exact junction of the Garlock and the San Andreas fault. So what that tells me is that the Garlock fault may be implicated with the next big earthquake to strike California. Maybe it actually happens on the Garlock fault, takes people by surprise. We do see this relationship across time where earthquakes will be more here to the east and then they shift over to the west. We're talking like a decadal long time scale. So like 50 years, 50 years, 50 years, even like 100, back and forth. So the Garlock fault being off there to the east could be the next one to rupture. But then at that point, I would say it's probably looking likely that we get something in Southern California. Though with this 5.6 up here with Willits, Ukiah, Redwood Valley, right? Then Northern California also is certainly looking active. And if we're talking about Northern California, Bay Area is very overdue. There's many faults in the Bay Area that are ready to go. The Hayward fault is a great example, but you also have Green Valley fault, Calaveras fault. That one is always ready to rock and roll. You have hidden faults that we don't even know of. I mean, a good example of that is the magnitude 6 that struck Napa 2014. We didn't know about the West Napa fault until it hit. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, we got a fault there. And oh, it connects into all the other faults there. So there is a possibility of a dual rupture with the Garlock and the Southern San Andreas simultaneously, or at least in quick succession. That is certainly possible. It's not the most likely outcome, but it could happen. So this 4.2, I'm looking at that pretty closely. And here we can see the different types of faults. So we see that there's really 4 main types. We have a normal fault where you have extension. One block moves down and away. See that? So it's getting longer. Here's a reverse fault. You have one block shooting up over the other, compressing everything and lifting the ground up. You have a right lateral strike slip where they're grinding past each other like this. That's the San Andreas. It's a right lateral strike slip. And here's a left lateral strike slip, which is the Garlock fault. So it's the opposite. So if we put that into context here, we saw that this was a strike slip earthquake with a bit of normal motion. So it was slightly extensional. There was a bit of extension occurring, and we had this strike slip component. Now, if this was on the Garlock fault, then we'd assume that it would be a left lateral strike slip. If it's San Andreas, it's right lateral. We don't exactly know because it's right at that junction, but we do know that there's a bit of extension there that occurred, just a bit of overall extension and expansion of the earth at that point. But with the left lateral, that means that the Garlock fault really starts to shove into the San Andreas, right? And we actually see that with the bend right there, right? So you see that this is a left lateral. So this is going off to the right. This is going here to the west. And you actually see the San Andreas gets bowed out and bent. Very interesting. So that 4.2, just in general, speaking to these ever-changing stress dynamics, and it's exactly on the fault plane, which is why this is significant. Normally a 4.2, not a big deal, but here we're seeing it, and well, I think it's a bit of a big deal. And just something interesting to point out is that we had a 1.2 M-class flare explode on the sun. This is the second strongest category of solar flare just a few hours before that 4.2 magnitude earthquake. And so they're closely linked together in time. The 4.2 significant historically, as I've described, and this solar flare seems to be connected into it because if you look at the geometric relationship, well, things get interesting. Here we see our DRAP model showing which side of the Earth is being lit up by the sun, and we see these changes in the ionosphere when a solar flare hits and ionizes and creates a bit more plasma. So let me rewind and go back to show you that. We see that this 1.2 M-class flare triggered a nice R1 radio blackout there over the Middle East, over India, and well, that's exactly the opposite side of the globe from California. So a lot of people in California know, right? They do this flight to India and back because there's a lot of linkages between Silicon Valley and India, for example. So this wasn't at some random angle. It was that you had the sun explode with a flare, and we actually right now have a Mercury cazimi. So Mercury's in front of the Earth, in between the sun and the Earth. And then exactly on the opposite side, nighttime, you have California. It rumbles with a 4.2 along a very significant critical fault junction. So if you add in the timing, the geometry, and more, it becomes significant. And it's not necessarily a sign that, okay, in the next 2 hours, we're going to have the big one. But certainly it is just a little bit more evidence that there are more interconnections with the Earth and the sun and other places on the globe all together than maybe most people realize. So the takeaway is that the magnitude 4.2 earthquake that struck Frazier Park exactly at the junction of the San Andreas and the Garlock fault, two faults that are overdue for big ones, magnitude 7.5 or greater. The San Andreas could even do magnitude 8 or greater. That is a significant critical junction. Here again, we see the magnitude 7s that have occurred in this area. And there's a lot of old historic earthquakes that are big for Southern California. And well, you don't really see any that are to the west in the recent time frame. This 7.5, 1952, being the most recent, you could say, that's still off to the east of the San Andreas Fault. And the 2019 Ridgecrest magnitude 7.1 is also off there to the east. The 7.1 1999 is off to the east. 1992 is there off to the east. So again, it's all in this East California Mojave Desert seismic zone. The one thing to point out, which is interesting, is that you do see this magnitude 7.2 that struck Mexicali there in 2010. And so this is, in general, the Gulf of California and Baja gets a ton of earthquake activity. And so we know that this area is likely not to rupture again with a big earthquake. We did have an earthquake swarm off of Brawley, just near the Brawley area a couple months ago. Magnitude 4s and 3s and things of that nature. A 7.2 is much more significant. But we know that it's not that this area needs to rupture now. We know that these areas don't really need to rupture now. They've done all their rupturing. But we know that the Garlock fault is overdue. Tons of stress has been put onto it from the Ridgecrest quake. We see the 7.5 there, 1812. It's been a long time since an earthquake struck directly on the San Andreas. We see Fort Tejon there. That again is 1857. And you see how they perfectly match both sides of that junction point. And then this 1952 quake there to the north, but not exactly on it. So I will keep you up to date on everything that's happening with earthquake activity in California and around the globe. I've been your host, Stefan Burns. Thank you all so much for watching. Please smash that thumbs up button to help the channel grow. Subscribe to stay up to date. I release videos almost daily. Wishing all of you well. Make sure you have an emergency plan in place if you live in California or anywhere that can experience natural disasters. Have a grab bag to go with just some basic supplies, hand crank radio. You may want to pick up a backup battery like an EcoFlow and a couple solar suitcases so you can plug it in and get some juice if things go wild. So wishing you all the best. Have a great day. I'll see you all in the next video.